welcome to this conversation. And we want to give big thanks to Gigi Kopelek for bringing us together to have it. I'm Clare Coss, and I'm here with a new friend, A.P. Tureaud, who we attended LSU in 1953 at the same time, and we met about 2 years ago. And we have a story that we really want to share with you and tell you, because it's been a great joy to get to know each other out of adversity into a nice situation. So I was a freshman at LSU. I'd come down from a small Quaker boarding school, and I was in Baton Rouge. I was familiar with Jim Crow, but I had never lived in it because my grandparents are from New Orleans. And at that very year, A.P. Tureaud's father had brought a case to integrate LSU in the undergraduate school. And his son, A.P. Tureaud Jr., was the one who attended the school and for 55 days under the court order. And then after 55 days, it was rescinded. So I would really, I got involved in this story because I didn't send a letter of protest. So it's called the Unsent Letter. And I would like to introduce you to A.P. Tureaud. I'm so glad to be here with you, A.P. After all these years, we're doing this interview together. Can you tell everybody what happened to you when you were at LSU in September of 1953?
Yes, well, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm one of 6 children. I'm a Black American. I'm from the Creole culture of Louisiana, mixed race, French and African slave heritage. My father was a civil rights lawyer in Louisiana for over 40 some odd years. And he decided as a young man that he would fight segregation because his family had been torn apart by the harsh mandates of the segregated South. So he educated himself and worked as a young man through law school in Washington, D.C., and came back to New Orleans in 1927 and started his civil rights activities. We grew up in an environment of total segregation where everything was separate and never equal. And the famous Homer Plessy case that was in the late 1896 really emanated out of the segregated South in New Orleans, where Homer Plessy boarded a train that was then to be resegregated after Reconstruction. And segregation ruled the South, and the violence and the harassment and the murders and the lynchings and all of those things happened.
Excuse me, just Plessy versus Ferguson was segregation equal, separate but equal. Right. Some people.
Yeah, but it was never, that was a decision that we could have segregation in the United States as a country, keep the races separate, but make the resources and the facilities and the opportunities equal. Well, we know that was never true. And so from that moment on, civil rights activists, black and white, decided that they would have to make sure that that mandate was changed and overruled.
Which it was in?
It was in 1954, with the famous Brown case. And
that's a long time that it was prevailed.
Yes. Yeah. Many, many years from 1896 to 1954. And my father was active in that case and was involved with the leadership in the country, black and white lawyers, and the NAACP, of course, and Thurgood Marshall. and hundreds and hundreds of other people. No one person helped to make those changes. This was an effort of Herculean dimensions for people to help America realize its responsibility to all of its citizens. So long story short, I'm one of 6 children. My mother, who also came from a slave heritage and was also a French mixture of French people and African slaves, was also a graduate of Howard University and a pharmacist. And she was one of the first female pharmacists in the city of New Orleans. She also graduated from Howard and came back to New Orleans about that time, 1927. And she met my dad, and they were married in 1931 during the Depression. There were 6 kids. I have 5 sisters. And we lived in an environment where everyone that I knew, whether they were longshoremen or whether they were black doctors or whether they were educators, black or white, or whether they were skilled tradespeople, everybody had an interest in changing the opportunities that were not allowed for people of color in the country and certainly in the South. So we grew up in an activist environment, but we also had a culture and a life. And New Orleans is very different from many parts in the South. It has a long history of international, a mixture of people, and also the commerce from South America, the exportation of its resources to Europe and the rest of the world. So it was, New Orleans was, and being in the mouth of the mighty Mississippi River, there was commerce and things like that all over. Long story short, we had educational opportunities. My parents were both well educated. My ancestors who came out of slavery also had opportunities during Reconstruction to have opportunities. But I lived under the rubric of black schools. Everything was, you're not allowed to go to the parks, you're not allowed to try on clothes in the store, you're not allowed to eat in the white restaurants or ride the train and have access to all of it. So everything was segregated.
I don't think any white person can begin to imagine what it is like to be black in America. No. I think it's just, we just have so much to learn and so much to act on, and so much to feel.
You're right. And you know, there were always white people who came over and were a part of the protests. Not large numbers, but there were always. And for my family, we reached out and formed interracial family picnics with some of the white people who had families and children who wanted to show that they did not support that type of situation.
So let's jump to LSU.
Yeah, let's go to LSU.
And what your father brought this case, and he won, which sent you to LSU as a freshman.
Well, my father started legal action against LSU in 1947, right after the war. I didn't decide to go to LSU until 1953, but Charles Hatfield, who was a young man from Baton Rouge and also New Orleans, came out of the war and he said, I want to go to LSU Law School, which was also segregated. We had no graduate schools for blacks in Louisiana. If any blacks wanted to go to graduate school, they had to leave the state. We had 2 black universities, Southern University and Grambling, that had undergraduate programs, but no graduate programs. So how could you have doctors? How could you have lawyers? How could you have optometrists? How could you have dentists? You had to leave the state, and you had to pay. The state wasn't giving you money to go. Now, where's the separate but equal in that? And so we had the white universities had graduate schools. They had law schools. They had all of the graduate schools they needed to provide services to the white community at a very high level. And LSU in Baton Rouge was the flagship school of the state. So when Charles Hatfield said he wanted to go to law school in 1947, my father took his desire and turned it into a legal suit for LSU, but had to revoke his interest because he was being threatened. My father thought he would be harmed. So that case was removed from the dockets of the court. And then I guess it had to be in the 50s, another young man came and said, I wanted to go to law school, Roy Wilson. And he was admitted to LSU Law School.
So let me interrupt you here for a moment. My understanding is your father, one by one with many of the graduate schools at LSU, was able to integrate the graduate programs. So then when it came to the undergraduate, you are the one who volunteered or wanted to fulfill, the dreams of your father and your community?
It didn't happen that way, but by the time I got to be a junior in high school, I started talking about where I wanted to go to school. And my father would go wherever you want to go, and I decided to pick LSU. I used to travel with him to these places and so forth. And he didn't recruit me. I made that decision on my own. My father would never recruit us, his children or his family members, to be plaintiffs.
Okay.
And so I wasn't going to be a plaintiff for his. And so my father's very easygoing, and he sort of minimized things. But so I'll get right into LSU because I want your story to be told about the Unsent Letter. So I decided to go to LSU, and I thought it would be okay. I thought after a while people would get accustomed to it, and I would have a great time there, and I would really, and I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't want to be a lawyer or anything. I hadn't decided. I thought I would evolve as I got there. But when I got there, and I was admitted on a preliminary injunction until the case was finally heard, I entered. It was a terrible experience. Everybody rejected me. The university wanted me out of the school. The governor wanted me out of the school. This was the first Southern state university that was formerly all white that was forced to admit a black undergraduate from all of the Southern states. And it was a big to-do for white people not to want blacks to be integrated. And they did all kinds of things and said very nasty things about having blacks and so forth at the school.
At one point you said you were the vilification was so total that you would talk to Mike the Tiger, the LSU football mascot, who lived in a cage behind the freshman boys' dormitory, which was in the back of the stadium.
Yeah.
And you told us a wonderful story in your book about how in a conversation with Mike, you thought he had a better situation than yours. You were both in prison. But then, can you tell the story about the man with his little boy who came up to you when you were talking to Mike? And
I lived in the dorm, and I was in the Air Force ROTC, and the guys were very, nobody spoke to me. The idea was that if you spoke to him and you befriended him, you would be blackballed. And I'm sure as a freshman, you saw in the newspaper every day something was happening with Tureaud and what to do about it and how they were trying to get rid of me and so forth and so on. The professors wouldn't touch my papers. They wouldn't acknowledge me in the classes. And so I was totally isolated. And I didn't like that. I'm a sociable person, so forth and so on. So I would go out and talk to Mike early in the morning. And someone had told me you have to be careful because it's an open campus and white people will be coming to look for you and could do you harm. And I saw this truck and I thought, well, I'm not running. If he wants to come for me, he's going to have to confront me here. But a black man got out and he was dressed in farmer's uniform, bib overalls and so forth. Asked me who I was and to stay where you are, I have something I want you to see. And he brought his son out, who was 7 or 8 years old. And he said, I want my son to see you here. so he will know that he could come to this university. And that was a touching moment for me.
Really?
Because I had become the symbol, and I was trying to figure out how to get out of there because I knew I wasn't going to be successful there. So long story short, I had to leave because the lawyers for
Before
LSU,
we get to your leaving, you mentioned the newspaper, the school newspaper, talking about your case, your situation. And that's when I learned about you. I was a pledge in a sorority, Kappa Kappa Gamma, and I was, a Yankee, and it was a little hard for me to make friends because I was a Northerner. And I saw in the Daily Reveille this terrible attempt to encourage you to drop out, to leave, from the President Middleton on down, and nobody wanted you there. And it was just shocking that the school newspaper, which I thought would be maybe neutral, just joined the clamor. So I wrote a letter. I was just outraged and said, how can you not support this young man who is entitled to go and have an education at the state university in his own state? And I was afraid to mail it. I did not send that letter. And it was like the impetus, it was like the ignition for me to become an activist after I thought about why didn't I don't know what would have happened to me, but I was scared. It was at the height of Jim Crow. I couldn't find one ally. They said, well, you don't understand it down here. Y'all don't understand it because, this is the way it is. You're from the North. You don't get our situation. So it was very upsetting to me. Mm-hmm. And then when Emmett Till was killed in 1955, just a few miles upriver, nobody wanted to talk about that. And that was really it for me. I thought, I have to get out of here. So I left the dormitory because we had no sorority houses because the legend is that a colleague of the president of the governor, Huey Long, his daughter didn't get into a sorority, so then he had no sorority houses at LSU. So we all lived in the dorm. So I tried to leave my sorority because I couldn't find any allies. And they said I couldn't leave because I knew the secrets, but I could become inactive. So I moved into the house of, it's called French House. It's a beautiful French mansion with a gorgeous chandelier from Bordeaux. And
no, it is. I've been there in that building.
It's just beautiful. And it's where the world global students lived, the female students lived, and I had a roommate from Guatemala. So I found a way to live an integrated life for my last year and a half at LSU by living at French House. And of course I was in the theater department, and they all liked my new friends from Holland and Costa Rica and Guatemala and Mexico and Germany. I mean, it was like in Mauritius, a whole bunch of guys from Mauritius studying sugar chemistry. So that was how I did it. And then when I graduated, I came back up north, and I started to, live a different kind of life, an integrated life.
What made you decide after 67 years that you were going to find me and have your letter published by the Daily Reveille? The school has a newspaper that came out every day. LSU is 25,000, 30,000 students today. It was small, a little bit smaller then, but it's still the flagship university, and lots of things have changed. I've gotten involved with them over the last 30 years because when I left, when I was asked to leave the school, and I said once I left I would never go back. And I went to Xavier, a black university in New Orleans, graduated, and then went to Columbia. And for 30 some odd years, I had no contact with LSU. I married my wife from Baton Rouge, and we would be in Baton Rouge. I would never go on that campus. I hated everything about it. Mm-hmm. And it was just a depressing thing. And I thought, why go back? And it's probably still as much a racist place as it's always been. But what made you decide, 2 years, was it 2 years ago we met, to do that? I mean, you are the only person from that time in my life to reach out to me as a white American to say, I'm sorry for what happened to you.
Well, I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm glad I finally did. Well, you know, Blanche and I were speaking at Xavier about 3 years ago, and on writing about famous people in different genres, and somebody in the Q&A said, you know, the A.P. Tureaud Sr. house has been made a stop on the American Civil Rights Trail, and his son was there to celebrate it. I said, his son was there? He's my age. He's still around? I would love to meet him. And I had carried your story with me all of these years. I mean, you were one of the inspirations for my activism, because while I wrote a letter, it's like Anne Braden, the great civil rights activist, she says, oh, yeah, go ahead. You can get your heart in the right place, but if you don't speak and you don't act, it doesn't have any effect.
Yes, yes.
But you know, get your heart in the right place, but then that place, but then go on. So I felt not only did you help me get my heart in the right place, but I became an activist, and it was. He gave me, the guy at the Xavier event gave me your phone number and your address, and I called you up, and I didn't know what kind of reaction I would have. I thought, oh my gosh, what's he going to think?
Well, that was very, very wonderful of you to call. I mean, it was astounding. I mean, that, because I've said all of these years, that's 67, it's longer now, but all of these years, nobody ever contacted me to say what they felt and what happened to them.
It's astounding.
You know, so, but I have had incredible experiences over the last 30 some odd years with LSU. They started a Black alumni chapter. They named a building for my dad. They gave me an honorary doctorate. I do many workshops there. I'm involved with students. We go to visit family there, and I take my family and my relatives and my friends to LSU to participate in these activities. And two or 3 years ago, I was a commencement speaker for the College of Art and Design. So I have really been cleansed of the terrible feelings that I've had.
That's wonderful. You made that happen. You really did. That's really admirable.
You know, I learned a lot from people around me. You don't harbor ill will inside of you all of the time, because it only destroys you. You have to move on.
Exactly.
And you have to heal yourself. And I went to Xavier Black University, which is wonderful. My wife went to Xavier, and I was nurtured there. And I went on to Columbia, and then I became a school administrator and teacher.
So it didn't, while it was a horrendous experience to be there for 55 days under those circumstances, you've made a beautiful life for yourself and an accomplished life. But, you know, one of the things I remembered saying to you when I called you was, I wrote this letter, and now I'm going to mail it. And they, LSU's, the Daily, it's now called the Reveille. I guess it's not Daily anymore. So they put the Unsent Letter in huge letters on top of the Tureaud building, named for your father. And and they dedicated that issue of the Reveille to desegregation at LSU. So it became a good political act for us to.
And it broadened the scope of what needed to be done and what still needs to be done.
Oh, yes.
And just this week, just last weekend, LSU, the former president resigned and went to a new position. And they were searching for a new president. And just this last week, we got notice that Dr. William Tate IV, a black man with credentials, extensive credentials, I don't think he's 50 years old, but I can't always tell, I haven't met him, is now going to be the new president of LSU. and he's black.
Oh, this is just the
And
best
that is
news. Yes.
something I never anticipated in my lifetime, because LSU has not had an extensive number of black staff members at all levels. The population at LSU is about 8 or 9% black and 5 or 6 or 7% Latino.
And we're planning, LSU's Department of Diversity is planning for us
to come down and do a program.
And do a program
for
in the
students
fall.
and faculty.
Yes, so we're very much looking
And
forward
we're
to that.
looking forward to
Yes.
that. And I think what you have done in continuing your activism and continuing the message, especially during this period of our lives, makes a significant contribution, because it shows that people can come together and make a difference. And I think it's right when you say you can be an activist and get your heart in the right place, but if you don't speak out and you don't reach out to others, it's a wasted moment.
I'm so glad we've had this opportunity to have our initial conversation, and I so look forward.
You know, it's wonderful to make friends with people who, and even if you don't always agree totally on everything, to find common ground and to support each other.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so tell us something about what comes next for you. What are you doing now that's so continuing your activism?
Well, I've written a libretto on the Emmett Till story, and the opera is going to be have a concert performance in March of 2022 in New York. Mary Watkins is the composer, and the music, the score is just splendid, really. It's a very exciting project I've been working on since 2013, and it's going to come to fruition next March.
And what you called me and told me the other day that there was some activity going on in Germany.
And then the play, Emmett Down in My Heart, has been translated into German by an Afro-German theater troupe. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be working on making a film of that this spring, mm-hmm. or now, the current.
But you've done other writings and other plays and historical pieces. I saw your piece about the NAACP and
Dr. Du Bois
Dr.
and Miss
Du Bois
Overton.
and Mrs.
Yes.
Overton on television.
And Dr. Du Bois said, if you want to have no criticism, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. So
I saw that. That was a wonderful piece. I saw it on television last year when it was shown.
So I want to thank you all for watching. It was a great opportunity for us to have this conversation and share it with you. And have a good day.
Yes.